welcome everybody. I really appreciate you all for joining.
Yeah. Quick introduction. My name is Reed. I've been involved in Community Rebuild's Living Building Challenge project since the beginning, back in 2018, I think, when we started. If you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Joe. I was the previous planning and development coordinator from October 2020 to October 2021. I was involved in a lot of different parts of CR's mission, but I focused on the place Puddle implementation for this LBC project. And then Brittany and Nick, if you guys want to jump in, maybe.
I'm Brittany. I worked on materials, waste, and social equity within the organization for the LBC project.
Hey everyone, and I'm Nick Tucker. I'm an architect at the firm in Salt Lake City called Architectural Nexus. And we just supported Community Rebuild as much as we could to get their wonderful projects into the living building status.
Thank you. So just to get things rolling, a little background on Community Rebuilds. We are an affordable housing builder out here in Moab, Utah. We build straw bale homes through an educational program. So a main part of our mission is education on sustainability, as well as combining affordability into sustainability. So we decided to take on the Living Building Challenge as a way to push the envelope of our mission and really see, how we could really shape things up and make a statement about sustainability. And we also were doing it as a way to expand our educational program to show that we're kind of in the front of green building.
Yeah, we definitely took this on as also a way of understanding every little component of our process as we build the already kind of energy efficient homes that our model is based off of, and then kind of take that to the next level and examine the components, the materials, like every little part of that goes into creating the homes. And we were lucky to be able to partner with Architectural Nexus to kind of help us formalize our process and take on this very exciting challenge that we hadn't gone through before, and luckily they were able to provide their expertise having gone through it before. I don't know if you want to speak to that and Arch Nexus's relationship with LBC a little bit, Nick.
Sure, yeah. So this project, when Community Rebuilds got in touch with us, it was on the tails of our office renovation in Sacramento. So we're headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah, but we do have a small office in Sacramento. And we purchased an existing building in the downtown of Sacramento and renovated it to be a living building, essentially. It was the first one in California. It was the 11th one in the world, I believe, and it was the first one in the world to be an adaptive reuse to become a living building. So this is an initiative that we believe in wholeheartedly. And so when Community Rebuilds reached out to us with this opportunity to work with them and build upon the great ideals that they already have, we typically work on a small, medium, large commercial scale, but this particular project was so intriguing, and we have our own personal admiration for Moab and the surrounding areas that we just had to do what we could to support them and continue that message of sustainable building, and we just couldn't turn it down. Really, one of the amazing things that I experienced during this was most of the requirements. When it comes down to building certification, you do have to prove a lot of things to get these certifications. A lot of what Community Rebuild was already doing was either meeting or beyond that, especially within the material realm, which is definitely the most challenging part of the living building challenge. So that was really amazing to see. we provided our help and our expertise, but Community Rebuilds was already doing a lot of very positive things and giving back to the community in a very positive way. So it was a really exciting project to be a part of, and I hope that you guys continue to build upon it.
Cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so we're going to do a little introduction into what the Living Building Challenge is in the first place. So it is a building certification, like Nick mentioned. Very few buildings in the world have it. Architectural Nexus has been kind of on the front lines of this, which is why we partnered with them when we decided we wanted to take on this challenge. So the basic idea of LBC is that a building should have the same impact on its environment as a plant or a flower. And so with that, they frame the certification based on a flower, and all the things you have to meet are called petals, and each petal sort of has a set of imperatives that you need to accomplish. So there's place, water, energy, health and happiness, materials, equity, and beauty. And so with that, it's going beyond what a typical building certification looks at, and is looking at a whole wide scope of everything that goes into the building, from the companies involved to every material, where they're coming from. It's looking at your embodied carbon, not just your energy footprint. So it's really pushing the envelope and saying sustainability is not just good enough, and it's also so much more multifaceted. So for Community Rebuilds, that was why we felt it dovetailed into our program so well, because we were already looking at the embodied carbon and the material aspects of sustainability, as well as the workplace, and being able to tie in education to like a longer term greener future.
Totally. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time in this first part of the presentation talking through each petal, just kind of giving an overview of what the requirements are. And then the second part, we'll take some questions after that, and then we'll jump into kind of our Community Rebuild's specific approach to meeting these requirements, because I think it's helpful to have this foundation of what the petals are all about.
Right.
So the first petal that is involved in the LBC challenge, that actually has kind of gone through a couple different iterations with different versions of the LBC certification that's come out in the past couple years, that we've kind of straddled as an organization, where we've gone to a different version of the LBC since we first started. So the first one that we want to talk about today is the place petal, which is kind of a novel concept, at least in the certifications that I've interfaced with, where you're taking this approach first and foremost to look at the actual setting and the place and the climate, the bioregion that a building that you're going to be constructing is situated within. So it's kind of bringing that focus of just the structure out from just the structure and into the actual environment that it's going to be interacting with and affecting and potentially displacing. So the category, it aims to restore a healthy relationship between nature, place, and community. And what goes into that is this first category, which is what they call the ecology of place, which has to do with understanding kind of a reference environment that you can basically, when you're researching and going through this process, you would find a local biome, or honestly, like you can get super granular and find the exact reference habitat, what plants are there, what are the species that exist, what microclimates are you a part of, and we'll go into detail about that for what that was for us, but that also involves if you are displacing certain environmental elements, you have to figure out a way to make up for some of that in a variety of different ways, whether that's like replanting native species, giving the existing species room to kind of expand and grow, and a ton of other elements that we'll get into more as we talk about our project. Urban agriculture, which is, sounds like what it is. It's basically, building in some sort of close to the structure food system that can help increase the food security of that individual building. So that scales down to kind of what our project was, which is 4 residential homes, all the way up to, what is often these larger residential, apartment buildings or corporate offices that, have to meet different requirements based on where they're situated within kind of density of the area. So for us, we kind of were in the middle. We're, located close to town. Semi-busy urban area for a rural community that we are, and then but not like right in the commercial district. Habitat exchange, which often comes in understanding the that displacement that we talked about, and then trying to figure out a way to offset that through preserving land in the land trust or making that habitat exchange happen within the site that you're building on. And then the last is human scaled living, which has a lot to do with, just making sure that you're not forgetting that humans are what we're building for, and making sure that there's opportunities for walking and cycling and alternative modes of transportation, but also so that amenities aren't so far away from, people who may need to use them, keeping that in mind that people like have zones that they frequently occupy, and you can't be putting essentials in such far away areas, and then just making sure that you're documenting that.
So next is the water pedal. The water pedal is probably, I think it was the hardest for us, besides maybe the materials pedal. But basically what they are looking at is 2 things. Number one, your water use and reducing it kind of in a ratio of what your surrounding area would normally use. And then making systems on your site so that your water usage and output are in a closed loop cycle. So that is obviously very complicated, and there's a lot of different legal rules that get involved. So it's a really funny set of imperatives to try and fulfill, because you run into a lot of legal roadblocks, and at like every level, local, state, and national, and you end up having to use a bunch of exceptions, which is basically the people running the Living Building Challenge saying, okay, we know that, if you were to do this, it would be illegal. And what we're trying to do is push the envelope of code and, what our possibilities are as a society. So we had to use a lot of exceptions to fulfill this challenge in creating a closed loop cycle of water within our project. And like Joe mentioned earlier, we were part of a couple different versions of Living Building Challenge. So they will update their requirements based on feedback from project teams, which is a really cool feature of the certification. So we basically were able to push back on a lot of things that they were expecting from the water pedal, which before was very much anti-infrastructure, and with good reason. Infrastructure is like not working in so many places, but here in Moab, we actually had a decent, our public infrastructure has a decent relationship with the landscape. And as an affordable housing project, it doesn't make sense to allocate all of our resources toward trying to be independent from our municipality. So it's a really cool pedal. They've added a lot of nuance to how you can fulfill it. And we still really push the envelope on what is allowed in the state of Utah by doing this pedal, and what our program does in general. Water is something we never really paid attention to before.
Yeah,
so
and we're excited to give you an overview of this one specifically, because as a high desert community,
it's important. Yeah. So next is the energy pedal. Similarly, it's looking at your energy usage in a closed loop cycle, and wanting all of the energy that you use on site to come from a renewable resource. So again, high desert, we have the sun, it's awesome. But then it also, another aspect of this pedal is that it does look at your embodied energy and carbon usage, as well as banning combustibles on site. You have to basically offset your carbon in the materials that you use, and really pay attention to what materials you're bringing in terms of their energy impact. And as well as reducing energy needs within the home. Next is health and happiness, which looks at creating a cleaner interior environment, as well as one that is more livable for human beings, and acknowledging their relationship to nature and that as a necessity. So for this one, you're looking at the ability to emit VOCs and other potentially harmful toxins in the materials you're bringing into the home. You're looking at indoor air quality testing and how humans interact with their home, and reducing the ways that they might be bringing toxins in. And then just basic livability things like having operable windows and access to nature and views and that sort of thing. Next, we have the materials pedal. Brittany, do you want to give a little overview of that?
Yeah, I can do that. So the materials pedal requires us to research 100% of the materials used in the build. And what we're looking for when we're researching them are a few different criteria. One being there's what's called the red list. So these are kind of the no-go chemicals that can't be in any of the materials that we use on the build. Some things you guys might recognize would be formaldehyde or lead or PVC. What it's also looking at is sourcing. So Reed mentioned kind of like where the materials are coming from. A significant portion of the building materials needs to come from a short radius to the work site. We also look at off-gassing. So a lot of materials that are used in the build have a potential to off-gas. So this is often kind of like your wet applied materials can continue to emit even after they're put on, like paints and sealers and things like that. So we're trying to find materials that don't off-gas, especially within the living environment for the folks living in it. Another piece of it is FSC, wood and advocacy. So FSC stands for Forest Stewardship Council, and it's essentially an organic label for wood manufacturers to make sure that they're sustainably harvesting and manufacturing the wood that's used. And another piece of this is kind of advocacy, especially towards extractive manufacturers, to make sure that they're complying by different standards and meeting those requirements. There's also a waste component to the materials pedal, which focuses on having a net positive waste, so recycling and reusing all materials, and then also bringing in salvage materials and kind of rethinking how those are in the home.
So that's obviously a huge pedal, and why it's considered one of the most notoriously difficult ones. It takes the most manpower for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So next is beauty.
Yeah. So I think this one is going to be really cool to illustrate through like our approach to how we accomplish this. But essentially, the beauty pedal seeks to celebrate design that uplifts the human spirit. I think this was really important for us as an organization, because part of our entire mission is to be creating affordable housing that kind of breaks the mold of traditional affordable housing, and creating beautiful, handcrafted homes that are incorporating already the idea that beauty is an important part of what is important to have a healthy life, and to be in housing that provides that element is really crucial already within our organization. So kind of accepting these additional challenges of beauty and biophilia, and then also like expanding that existing ethos that we have into like education and inspiration to the community was a big part of this project as well. And I just said, those elements are kind of part of the LBC requirements, to be showing and explaining your process and your you're the beautiful elements of your home to the community, so that it's not just for the inhabitants or the workers in an office building, for example. Or do you mind talking a little bit about equity?
Totally. So equity looks at the social equity of the organization itself. So for most of the petals, we're looking at the building and construction of the building. But this petal is kind of unique where it kind of shifts the focus to the organization that is doing the building. And so LBC has a framework called the JUST label, which is one method of beginning to look at the social equity within an organization, and has a bunch of different factors, including diversity and inclusion, employee engagement, employee benefits, stewardship, so how the organization is interacting with the community, among more things. So we'll talk more a little bit later about what that meant for CR specifically.
Cool. So now we can hop into a little bit of questions.
So LBC can apply to existing structures, and they have different frameworks that will apply to different kinds of building. So you can actually do a living building challenge for, say, a landscape, or at the community scale, or at the remodel scale. The project that Nick talked about earlier, that Architectural Nexus did in Sacramento, California, was actually a remodel, but they were doing so much work to it that it was almost considered a new building. They just used the envelope of an old building. Whereas kind of the remodel version of this has fewer requirements, actually. There's also like an apartment version. So if you're just doing one section within a larger building, or just the interior of the envelope, there's a different set of requirements for that. And then another thing to say is Living Building Challenge is run by an organization called the International Living Futures Institute. And this group runs a couple of different other labels and certification programs. So one doesn't have to do the full Living Building Challenge. Like it is called a challenge because it's hard, and they're not expecting for every project to want to achieve this level of sustainability. But there are different versions. I really like the idea of one of their programs, which is called CORE, which is basically a smaller scope that's still super well-rounded, and is saying like, what can you do kind of in a more reasonable way to make our buildings the best that they can be. And they have ones that are just apply to water, or just apply to energy. So yeah, there's all sorts of different versions that one could do of this program.
Cool. Don't see any other questions?
Okay, so back to our timeline. We started this project in 2018, and that was mostly just planning for a little less than a year. Our project was also on the site of a previously existing building. So we had a demolition phase in which we salvaged as much material as we could from the building we were tearing down, and then began construction in July of 2019. Obviously, 2019 into 2020 and 2021 got a little hairy with the pandemic and government shutdowns. Community Rebuilds is a government-funded program. So there were lots of roadblocks that kind of extended our timeline to be a little bit longer than we were expecting. And now at this point, we're in the performance period. So I'm not sure if we mentioned this earlier, but to get an LBC certification, you have to prove that your building is performing in the way that you promised. So other programs like LEED or Passive House, you're getting that certification based on your designs, not on proven performance. So that's kind of a unique quality of this program as well.
Yeah, it's not just a snapshot of, it's pristine, it's just built, and you gotta see how this holds up. So we'll talk more about the performance period in a little bit.
Yeah. So the planning phase, honestly, I wish we'd had more. Wish we'd had a little bit more time. to do it, but our planning phase was a little bit under a year. And so there's a huge learning curve to the Living Building Challenge. There's obviously so many rules. Our primer on it was super light. There's so many details and ins and outs of how they want all this documented, what they want it to look like, and there's so many conversations with the people running the certification because they know it's hard. There's only 20 some buildings in the world that have it, and so they're also wondering how to make it more possible. We were planning for about 9 months, and we're kind of starting construction as we were planning the project. And a huge part of the planning process is vetting materials. So to return to the materials requirements, and I'll let Brittany speak to this in 1 second, but it's requiring you to look at every single thing you bring into the building, what it is made out of, where it's coming from, and if it's potentially toxic or harmful at all. So that is obviously a ton of work. That is one of the planning components that you start right at the beginning of the project. So Brittany did a lot of our material vetting and was our kind of eyes on site for our material usage. So Britt, if you want to talk a little bit to the vetting process.
Yeah, you bet. Something that Reed just mentioned was how long some of these things took, and we definitely tried to front load as much of the materials as possible. Because some of the research sometimes takes like weeks to months at a time just to get a hold of manufacturers, and then oftentimes you're asking for material information that maybe they have to reach out to someone else about, or sometimes you get kind of like lost in the like phone call itself, and it's hard to get a hold of people, and so it's kind of a tedious process, especially when there's so many pieces for every material that you need in the build. So we bring this up now because it took such a long time and was a huge part of not only the planning phase and the pre-construction phase, but also all the way through the end of the construction phase. And we found that even doing as much research as we could at the start, we were like researching things on the fly, be like, oh shoot, we need this glue that we haven't vetted yet, or you know, some of the smaller things that we maybe didn't think of in the beginning. Those things, given the time it took to communicate with manufacturers, was sometimes difficult. So I'd recommend, just if you're interested in LBC project, loading that and being detailed with the materials that you'll need later on in the build. One thing that also came up with this is lengthy wait times. So since we were new materials, we had to reach out to companies that maybe had different lead times than we were used to, and some things took like months to maybe up to a year to get a hold of. So also something to think about, especially for kind of your big ticket items, being like for us, that was our wood package and our trusses.
A little bit about the performance period, since we mentioned that earlier. This year-long period happens basically after everything has been set in place. Basically for us, it happened more or less when the certificate of occupancy was granted to the homeowners. Kind of a little bit of finessing based on the fact that we had kind of these two phases that Brittany mentioned. So standalone homes and then the twin homes. So we ended up waiting until all four of them were ready to go.
Yeah.
Which is good because that basically, you know, kept us engaged with these kind of new systems that we had developed for these houses, and then, you know, we made sure that they were working, you know, totally 100% before we, you know, set things in motion. So basically involves kind of what you would imagine, creating a tracking table for energy usage and water usage, making sure that we're net zero and or positive on energy generation, and you know, we'll get more into what those systems are as we talk about each pedal, but yeah, just making sure that that those systems are working properly and that the homeowners know how to use them, crucially. So we created guides for each homeowner as well as best practices for them to follow. As far as we've been tracking, all of the homes are performing well above the minimum requirements. We do have data from mid-2020 on the first homes that were completed, and those have been continuing to perform super well. And also, kind of this process of tracking our homes has been something that we've sought to actually increase to our normal home building process so that we can see where we need to adjust in future builds, but also sometimes for solar or something, we can let the homeowner know, like, hey, something is like really a big energy draw. Like, is there something that you can address? And oftentimes it's like an accidental thing, or like a solar panel is like not connected, like, something is a little bit off in wiring, and we can just let them know. And instead of like, oh wow, like 6 months later billing, like I didn't get this, we can let them know in real time.
Right.
And yeah, I think we mentioned this earlier, but we're set to end the performance period in July of 2022 for these homes.
The human recipe is kind of something that we've been wanting to emphasize about these builds. I don't know, I think of our team as being extremely scrappy in the way that we've been able to put this together, and I think the folks with ILFI really appreciate that. And usually it's been big commercial projects that come in and do these projects, and people with a lot of resources. So for a small nonprofit to come in and be like, no, we want to do this too. It's been a ton of work, and also we have an incredible team and they have an incredible team. So it's been really cool to work with. It's been a ton of hours, more than 10,000 hours planning, vetting, and documenting the building process. That's totally outside of that's like in addition to building the building. So this project was a much bigger endeavor than our normal home build, and it helped us really stretch our wings and push our own model. We had never really looked too closely at things like waste or water usage, or this close at our materials. So it really, as much as it was a ton of work, I don't think we would have accomplished the things that we did if we didn't have this certification to kind of tell us to and encourage us to.
Totally. And just provide guidelines for us to examine every part of our process.
Right.
So now kind of getting into each individual petal, we'll kind of run through it in the same way that we went through them earlier, but the place petal, as I mentioned, has a primary focus on restoring the ecological conditions below that baseline that you are basically identifying on your own about the site that you're building on. So, for example, in a very broad way, you could look at the Colorado Plateau as the biome of Moab in general, but basically, like, because of how many microclimates exist even within such a broad environmental descriptor, we were able to kind of more closely look at this site and be like, no, actually we're pretty close to a riparian habitat. There is water that does move through this site in a way that a lot of the other like highland areas around Moab would not. There is like a little bit more diversity of species because of that. So we kind of looked at a site nearby, actually basically just a little bit upstream of where this site was, that is located on BLM land, and we were able to kind of look at those species that were existing there, and that includes plants, animals, all above and below that. So we were able to basically create a landscape plan that fit the urban agriculture requirements into that, as well as kind of use peripheral areas of the site to kind of rewild the site in a little bit. So kind of give those natives a chance to kind of reclaim their space within the site. Anecdotal evidence so far, seen lots of little lizards and pollinators and birds coming back to the site, which is obviously great to see. Another cool thing about this pedal is that, as with all of them, there's a lot of interaction between each individual pedal. So for us, the kind of the water pedal and the way that we set up the like site hydrology through water catchment cisterns, and then also just kind of the earthworks that were built on site, we were able to kind of create that system of stacking functions that allow the homeowners to have their space for growing their food crops, their annuals, their perennials, and then also have it be part of the same system with the natives that are bringing in pollinators and all the other good species that are going to help this whole site be successful. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is that habitat exchange portion. We actually committed to protect an acre of land in Tasmania. It's a pretty cool little land trust organization down there, and we were able to, even as a nonprofit that is mostly focused on providing as affordable as possible homes to homeowners, we found a way to be able to dedicate some resources to that, which I think means a lot and could be a great model for any development that's happening on. And because I think like in a big way, the LBC process forces you to consider like what you're displacing or like what you're encroaching upon if you're totally engaging in new development on prime land that could otherwise be used for agriculture or as like a really vital ecological site. So that was something that was really cool to go through and see how that turned out. Yeah, and so again, as I mentioned, the landscaping involved kind of coming up with some planting plans with those native and locally adapted species that were kind of accessory to the urban agriculture parts of the site. And so all the plants were chosen to have a specific function, such as providing a screen or noise barrier for the homeowners and pollinator habitat. Some were for soil remediation, nitrogen fixing plants, and then others were kind of meant to help keep the soil in place and be part of that hydrological system like we talked about. And I think, most of this I touched upon where like a lot of those natives were planted in peripheral areas, and it was designed to mimic naturally occurring landscape features of the high desert. And this is a little screenshot if you ever want to go back and look at it. But yeah, just basically how we chose these 3 sites and which species we were able to incorporate and figure out how to exist within that system rather than just kind of like being ornamental plants necessarily. So that was a really cool and fun process to go through.
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, the water pedal was a really groundbreaking one for us and really difficult, and we still had to use a lot of exceptions in order to hopefully achieve it. So for us, one of the main challenges with this is that it is expensive and requires a lot of expertise that we didn't necessarily have. So Living Building Challenge wants you to create a closed loop cycle on your site. So they want you to know where all of your water is coming from and where all of it is going. And just simply the way that a municipality works isn't really enough. So these homes have rainwater collection, which was a first for community rebuilds. We use rainwater to water the landscaping and for toilet flushing. Unfortunately, we were not able to use water we collected for potable purposes, which is one of the exceptions that a lot of projects end up using. Because that is a really high level law. It's I think a national law.
Yeah, it's I think it's something that they, through this process are gathering evidence on. I think that's a cool part of this. Like,
right.
The LBC process is that they have all of these different, projects that are
that are all advocating and asking, can I create my own potable water and or have it come from different sources than just the municipality, and like, can we not have chlorine in it, all sorts of stuff.
I think something with this that I like to mention, which is interesting in particular for our ecological conditions or environmental conditions, is that like we exist within the high desert environment. We get less than 10 inches of rain a year, So kind of one thing that we kind of pushed back on and helped like kind of, I don't know, create a new perspective on with ILFI and this project was kind of showing and identifying that like our water comes from, a runoff from the local mountain, and so
Right.
our hydrological system is a little bit different. Our aquifers are not recharged by rain; they're
Right.
recharged by below ground aquifers that are recharged through rainfall that happens in the mountains. So
and so during this process, we went from their third version of the certification to the fourth, and so we were able to provide that feedback and say like, look, our ecology just works a lot differently than what your certification seems to be wanting to see or suggesting. And also before they never let teams use like a cost consideration either for doing or not doing something. And so us coming in and saying, look, affordability is our priority. We're trying to create affordable housing, and we're not trying to create any other burdens on low-income homeowners by putting in super expensive, hard to maintain water equipment. And so they have sort of recrafted a lot of this Puddle with that feedback in mind of like, oh, different teams are going to have different priorities around this. And so they offer other creative solutions to kind of essentially like pay back for your impact and saying like, okay, if you're using this much water here, where else are you saving it? Or if you're putting into the sewer here, where else are you potentially not putting it into the sewer? So some other exciting features of our water systems is that we installed Greywater Basins, which was, Community Rebuilds always stubs out for Greywater, but we as a program have never installed it ourselves. So that was a big point of growth for us. And to be able to create resources and kind of know how it's done and actually be able to guide homeowners in the future on collecting rainwater and setting up Greywater in their yards. And with that, we're really only sending culinary water from the kitchen, like wastewater coming from the kitchen and from the toilet to the sewer. Everything else, every other water source in the house is going out into the gardens and watering plants in the landscaping. The biggest success is that we were able to install the first residential composting toilets in the state. There are probably some non-permitted ones, but this was a big collaboration with the Utah State Health Department, and we had some pretty beautiful moments with them where they were like, wow, thank you for getting us to push the envelope, because for one of the driest states in the nation to not legally allow composting toilets, it's kind of weird. So we basically said, like, let us try it out for you. Let us be your trial. And we eventually got them to say, okay, after asking many times.
Yeah. I think the kind of the formalized process of the LBC certification is kind of, I think, a little bit what made them comfortable with being like, okay, you're not just like whatever willy-nilly experimenting, like this is happening in the formal process. So it's also a cool, you wish it wasn't always that wasn't always necessary, but it is, sometimes how change happens. So
cool. So Energy Puddle, Energy Puddle was a pretty straightforward one for us. We've always included energy efficiency into our program. And so I often think of this as a way for us to have our little platform to be like, look, passive solar, thermal mass, straw bales, and like all this natural materials really can change the performance of a building. And like we've been doing this for a long time. And so orienting our buildings in certain ways, so that, the sun is doing a lot of work for us, really lowers the energy requirements of our homes. We also had solar panels on these homes, which we have on that's kind of the CR standard.
Mhm.
And then another exciting part of this is that we were actually required to do a carbon calculation. And we tried to do, actually Architectural Nexus helped us with this, and they tried to do a calculation on a couple of more standardized carbon calculators, and none of those programs let you or would account for natural materials or salvage materials. And so all of those calculations were super inaccurate because the closest thing they had to an adobe floor was concrete, and like that is obviously a huge difference. And they didn't have something in there for straw bales, which are actually carbon sequestering. Same with FSC wood versus standard lumber. FSC wood is going to be carbon sequestering, whereas standard lumber isn't necessarily.
Right.
So Chris Magwood with the Endeavor Center, they've been developing the beam calculator, and so we were finally able to get an accurate calculation of our homes, and found out they have about a quarter of the footprint of a normal, similarly sized building.
Yeah.
So that was super exciting for us to actually have some facts around that. And
totally, yeah, and I think it also gave us the knowledge of like how we can go even lower and maybe even like eventually get to a point where we're net sequestering, if possible.
Right.
With enough salvage materials, there's always a
right. Health and happiness. So this one is truly more tied in with some of the other pedals. It's one of those where it relates a lot to the materials pedal, because you end up vetting materials for VOCs and other toxins that might be affecting your air quality. It wants you to have access to nature, which then gets involved in the beauty pedal. So this was kind of an interesting and more, I don't want to say it was truly straightforward, but we'll probably talk a little bit more about it with the materials pedal. One difficult thing about it is the expertise, the like chemical material expertise required to be like, does this off gas? Is that okay? Yeah. And Brittany and I did a lot of that materials vetting and learned a lot about chemistry for that purpose.
I think this one, like our existing model, really shone through, and we had a lot of things. We're like, okay, like we're kind of already doing that, and
right. We're already paying attention to material health.
Right.
Yeah. So another aspect of the health and happiness is indoor air quality testing, and that was another place where we were like, the chemicals they're asking you to test for, we were like, look, none of this is going to occur here. You can eat most of the material. Well, it wouldn't be good for you, but you could consume a lot of the materials that go into our buildings because they come pretty directly from the natural environment. So they allowed us to kind of lower the testing requirements, which was super helpful. And Brittany will talk a little bit more about materials and how that.
We've been talking about a little bit about materials already, kind of the pieces that we are looking at being the red list. So what are the chemicals that we cannot have in our build? Where is it coming from? Is it off-gassing like we were just talking about with Health and Happiness Pedal? And then the kind of FSC or Forest Stewardship Council and advocacy. So how is this material really being made? And this was a pedal that we as a natural building program were kind of most excited about. It's something that we put a lot of intention in already, and we are curious about how to kind of expand on the materials that we already have and address a few materials that we had kind of wanted to change for a long time, or see if there were different products that we could use, but maybe didn't have that like push that we needed. We had a lot of other things going on. So this kind of gave us an extra excuse to be like, okay, now we get to address this material that, and try to find an alternative that aligns more with our mission as natural builders. So I'll just kind of, since we were low on time in general, I'll just kind of stick to some of the materials that we switched out in the build and ones that we tried to address. And if you guys have specific materials questions, you can always ask us later. But a few of the things that we were already doing was having natural plasters, adobe floor, straw bales, things along those lines. So a lot of straw bale wood, dirt and clays and things like that. A few things that we did end up changing was moving from blue foam to rock wool. So blue foam going on the outside of the foundation, protecting the concrete and adding insulation to the concrete. We substituted that out with a product called rock wool. We also added rainwater tanks and cisterns to the houses so the homeowners could collect water during the year as it rained. We put in low flow water fixtures, which we've really continued to do in future homes, which is really exciting. All of the wood that wasn't salvaged was FSC wood. And then we switched from OSB to plywood. OSB often has formaldehyde into it that has potential to continue to off-gas within the home. So switching that out for plywood is exciting for us. We also switched this got a little tricky with some restrictions with code, but we switched a lot of the PVC piping to a different plastic called HDPE. We went to casement windows, so pretty much all of the sliding windows have PVC in them, and so we went to kind of like a crank style or awning style casement window. And then we switched out several of our caulks and sealants. So those were kind of the common wet applied products in our builds that we found some like no or low VOC options there so that they didn't continue to emit in the home, which was exciting. And the other big portion of the materials Puddle is waste. So we had net positive waste, which means that we use 100% of the building waste, meaning even packaging materials, extra of any product. It all got reused, recycled, or kind of reimagined in our build. Mm-hmm. And that's also an ethic that we kind of already carry as a program in the company. But it was really exciting to kind of push that envelope even more for us and allowed us to get extra creative on site. And the few pictures here to show you guys some examples of some of those things. This first picture is of some of our pallet framed walls. And within the pallets, we've stuffed with cob, and then we also use this as an opportunity to put some trash or wood cutoffs into the mass of the walls. There were a bunch of other ways that we use things within the new construction that we were building as well. And then we also had a lot of students as well as staff and other folks who were taking some of the materials and creating new items out of them. And this next picture shows some spoons that were carved by one of our wonderful interns and many of the other interns from that semester, as well as some plywood crates that Kate made there. And then this last picture is kind of the first iteration of what we did with our leftover waste. These are called Ubuntu blocks. So any waste that was left, we used this press to squish it down into these blocks that kind of look like trash straw bales. And then we we stacked them up later on at a local resident's house and made an outdoor wall. And so that picture there shows all of the remaining waste from our build is in those blocks there. Yeah. And that was the waste from the 2 single-family homes, so 3-bedroom, 1-bath homes.
Mhm.
And that process ended up being kind of clunky at times, and so for phase 2, we decided to kind of to change a few things up a little bit, and Merritt really took the charge on this and created a masterpiece that we refer to as the materials monument, and is all of the trash left over from the twin homes is a part of that plastered wall there. And this was also a great way for us to kind of address the beauty petal. I think beauty is something that's super subjective, and it's something that, you know, we're always thinking about when we're building homes for families in our community, and this was another way that we could interact with that piece there. So in addition to, you know, a lot of our plasters and details and different like colors and things that the homeowners get to kind of like choose and decide for their own styles and for themselves, we also created this materials monument, which doubles as a sound barrier as well on a busy street corner. And this allows community members to kind of like have an interaction with the project. Merritt designed in several windows so that you can see the trash that's within the wall, and there's a public bench there as well. And then equity. So equity focuses on the social equity within the organization. So now we're taking a look inward at how we operate as an organization. And there's so many different ways to do this, and the way that ILFI requests or kind of like aligns out for project teams is through the JUST label. And the JUST label is essentially a framework for the organization to go through a number of different factors and see how they're doing essentially. So what are ways that what are things that we're doing well in terms of equity, and where do we need to focus our energy on and really change and grow as an organization? And so we grouped up as a staff and went over a lot of, we went through all of these factors and looked back into the policies that existed within our organization and changed ones that no longer served us and added ones that we were missing. And then that kind of just like started the conversation, and we've been like changing and growing in many ways since. And that's been really, really exciting, and something that we're excited to continue to look at. A few kind of like highlights or changes that have come out of us approaching the JUST label for our team specifically was in adding a retirement plan for employees, creating a maternity leave policy, having paid time off volunteering in our community, and creating a health and wellness plan, as well as moving towards vegetarian meals, reducing our meat consumption. And so those are just a few ways to address equity, and the label looks at many more. And yeah, again, there's lots of ways to continue to grow there. So thankful for Jess for providing us a framework to start to address those things.
Cool. So thank you, Brittany. I think we're gonna talk a little bit about the takeaways that we have. I think, like, first and foremost, one of the cool takeaways that we had was just how many similarities that we had within our existing program and model, but pushing it forward, and it kind of then creates an opportunity to be like, wow, this is like, you know, it's easy for us to take it for granted, but we've already been doing this so well. Let's like acknowledge that, and then also, you know, kind of take that magnifying lens to the shortcomings and see if we can fix those. And then as a small organization, we kind of found that, the LBC process took a lot of resources as we went over, like away from what our usual mission is, which is, basically trying to dedicate our program, all facets of it all the time, to creating as much affordable housing as we can within our community. So it was really awesome to go through this process, and kind of like chunk away at the like things that we were trying to fix, like slowly over time, and as we continue to build more. But I think we want to let anyone know who's interested in this that it's a ton of resources and it's worth it. But it's a lot.
I think for all of us who have had hands on this project, there's things that we wish we could have done better or redo, and so I don't know, I'd love to talk to people that are interested in doing it. As much as I'm like, I don't need to ever read the material again. It's kind of an amazing process, and there's so much intention packed in. And I think we grew a ton. ILFI grew a ton working with us, which was very cool. And I think we created a really unique product. I think we're getting a couple of questions in.
First one, Justin asked, what was one surprising or unexpected twist you experienced during the project? Hard to pick one, but I'll let you pick that one.
Ooh, there were so many. We've touched a little bit on this, but switching from kind of the 3.2 version to the 4.0 version was a really unique twist. It doesn't sound that interesting, but it was kind of cool because basically midway they were like, look, we have all these things that could make this so much easier for you. And then to be like, yes. And also that vision, I don't know, having to kind of pivot that vision a little bit to comply with their new guidelines. There are so many unexpected twists from COVID-19 happening and kind of losing our intern class and having it just be build staff building. Brittany, did you have any fun twists that came to mind?
Similarly, I felt like every day was a twist. It was just trying to figure things out a lot of the time, and a lot of materials twists, and just like trying to track down difficult materials and things, and then things completely out of our control.
Right.
I would say, like, generally, maybe this is helpful for someone who's interested in the LBC process. Like, all of there's such an interconnectedness to, the way that a project like this has to unfold. And I think, like, having a really rigorous planning process can kind of help. As much as, like, it can feel overkill at times, like, having that setup is really crucial. And I think it often, like, allows you to, have more flexibility instead of less flexibility sometimes when you're having to be reactive to things. Like,
right.
I would say, like, with the landscape, it's a really cool process to go through and, like, understand your region. And then, like, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to have that mesh with the hydrology and everything else. So I think that's, like, always a cool, I don't know, way to even situating the homes so that you're not, like, blocking out prime areas for agriculture.
Right. It was an interesting process because you go into it and then you realize how much you don't know.
Right.
And then you're like, I wish we could have had a much more slower and intentional time for planning, but that's simply not how our program was able to work at that time. So if anyone, just researching anything you can of like the possibilities, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think fitting this in with our model, we are funded through government organizations, and the primary goal is to create this affordable housing that I think is a good segue into the next question that Robin had about if the LBC project has changed the way we plan to build future CR houses. I think I mean, definitely is the short answer. I think Britt and Reed both mentioned that we did a lot of fixtures research for this project, and we found a lot of good water saving and Energy Star appliances that are really awesome, as well as I want to say really fleshed out our ability to accept salvaged goods and add that into our program.
Yeah, that's such a mixed bag of a question because, we, like any other organization, we were really affected by the pandemic. So CR also has really tight resources right now. So we also have, there's all these battling spheres of influence where it's okay, we're kind of in this desperation mode of continuing, but we did do this LBC project and learned so much.
Right.
To some degree, I think it gave us confidence in what we were already doing. I know for me, learning about all the municipal systems that we're already on and being wow, this actually is very cool and not a bad thing when the assumption is that something else is going on. So in some ways it just kind of reinforced what we were already doing and also it provided the opportunity, like Brittany said, and pointed out all the materials that we got to switch out. So as natural builders, there's always been materials that we were not satisfied with that we got to do research and figure out how we could switch out different materials.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that we're incredibly grateful for the homeowners that went through this process with us, because they are also part of that learning experiment. And these new systems that we integrated, we have such a wealth of knowledge and also existing structures that are performing, and we're tracking them right now, and we're going to take that information even and push that further and see what we can't do with that information, especially given a bunch of the water systems and the landscape is something that we've never even really approached thinking about in a super intentional way.
Right.
So I don't know, this next question from Jalal, I don't know, kind of speak to that one a little bit.
For sure. So Jalal asked, were there any other frameworks or certifications that CR considered, or did LBC always seem like the appropriate target? And then they also asked about any specific case studies we built off of. So no, we did not look at any other certifications or frameworks. Originally, it was kind of interesting when I joined Community Rebuilds, they were like, oh, we'll do LBC, but not actually we'll do the intent, but not actually get the certification. At first, they were not concerned about having that label on our building. But it turns out it's just so much work that you need the resources of actually signing up to get the certification to even come remotely close to fulfilling the intent of it. At that time, our ED was Emily Niehaus, who was the founder of Community Rebuilds. She's also the mayor of Moab currently. Or
just formerly.
Just formerly. Okay, that just switched.
So within the entire LBC process.
Yeah, right.
We completed a term as mayor.
Right. So she has such a big, excitable, almost aggressive personality. So as soon as she learned about the Living Building Challenge, and basically it was explained to her as the thing we should be aiming for, the pie in the sky. And it definitely is the most aggressive building certification that there is, and it has such a huge scope where it's not just save energy or have a completely sealed house or something. So I think that target was set, and she was like, we got to go for the biggest option. And with that, maybe it was not the most appropriate target. Yeah. I'm certainly glad we did it. I think as an organization, we're proud of what we've done, but there is definitely a complication of stakeholders and saying our primary goal is like serving our homeowners and
Right.
creating affordable housing. And so to kind of tie in this certification and ask them to jump on board, I think borders on, it's a little strange. But ultimately, I think we're all happy with the product, and they were definitely very excited to be pushing the sustainability envelope too.
Totally, and yeah, like I said, grateful for them because not everyone would be as willing, and these homeowners would have to really, really awesome and willing to be along for that in that process. I would say also to the second part of the question, I think what's cool about this certification process is that it really pushes you to incorporate, I guess, things that are happening or like research that's taking place, like in higher education, or like research that's happening in universities, or materials studies that are going on, like with even our manufacturers, and like I think we would reach out to someone and be like, oh yeah, like either we're like working on addressing this, or like we have like had this come up, and we're like, we're trying to provide this solution.
Yeah, I don't know that there are any specific case studies of projects that we looked at. There aren't too many.
There's no affordable housing. This is
right, and there aren't many in the same environment.
Right.
But the thing with that is that we kind of get to be the case study and hold hands with all these other organizations trying to accomplish the same thing or similar things. Like there are other affordable housing teams. One of them is Arizona, and it's really cool to like be kind of seeing what they're doing. There's all the different materials groups. There's lots of people that are trying to create databases, and so to be able to establish those relationships and kind of everybody gets to share their research around, which is really exciting.
And for me, like, I think it was really awesome to actually interface with organizations within our our community, like USU, like Utah State University Extension has an awesome like permaculture program, and they've built these gardens and have guides on like revegetation, working with the local nursery. It's like I think it's such a really cool way to like very closely interact with like every component of your build, and like, that only reinforces the community ties that we have as affordable housing agency. So no other questions have come through.
Did you have any takeaways or anything you wanted to add, Brittany, that we haven't mentioned? Not to put you on the spot, just
I feel like y'all really covered it. I think it's been an amazing learning opportunity for our organization, and I think really aligns closely with the values that we hold. Trying to serve our community while also addressing climate change and the environment. And I think something that was really beautiful about doing the Living Building Challenge was how sort of holistic it was. And so there were things that we were already focused on, maybe like materials and energy and things like that, but then new pieces to the puzzle, like water and like equity and place, and things that I think have really changed how we think as an organization in so many more ways than we've talked about here, or that I think a lot of the change goes really deep. And it's been really exciting to be a part of that and see that continue to add vibrancy to the builds that we continue to build. And hopefully, I think one of the other reasons why we specifically chose to do LBC was to kind of create a bridge between straw build and natural building. Maybe more conventional building, and especially on Living Building Challenge, having that platform to connect with other projects and other builders and architects, and kind of bringing this way of building to the forefront, I think was really important to us as an organization. And And I don't want to totally speak for Emily here, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that like the moment when LBC kind of came into CR's world, I think the importance of this was of like environmental change in our buildings in this kind of visceral way was extremely important. Like it was kind of like we really need more drastic change now, and if we're going to get there and kind of affect change on a bigger scale, like we really need to start connecting this information to other people.
Yeah.
And so LBC has definitely kind of helped create a bridge there that we're grateful for.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brittany. It's so fun to like be involved with them, and most past projects are kind of a lot more high tech or bigger or whatever, and so for us to come in and be like, hey guys, but what about like natural materials and like
hitting your head against the energy requirements.
Yeah, how about make a smaller building that's passive solar, which isn't obviously not always an option, but like it's kind of cool to have representation and be able to tie natural building in, because that is definitely a key factor in sustainability that gets kind of forgotten about, where you're like, oh, there's this,
Yeah, it's gonna be really awesome to like finish this performance period and like hopefully be able to be in full retrospect. But it's been an incredible time, and everyone has put in so much effort, and we're very grateful and grateful for all of you for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you everybody.
With that, I think we'll wrap this up, and I'm sure this won't be the only opportunity to get more information about this project. So keep
I was also going to add, feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions.
Yes.
Also, if you're curious about maybe like a further research into materials or like CR's Just label specifically, those are all public information. And so if you're interested in that, we can send you a link, or you can find it on the ILFI website. Or LBC is all about transparency and really like helping to connect all of the pieces and help other groups begin to achieve this, or at least tackle pieces of it. So please reach out if you have any questions about specifics or want to know how to find different information on our project.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Well, thanks everybody. Yeah. Thanks, Brittany. Thanks, Reed.
Thanks, you.
Hopefully, be in touch. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.